And so our last session for the day is, again, Dr. Christopher Okonkwo is joining us. If you have just joined us yourselves, he is an associate professor at the University of Missouri and was nice enough to come and do the plenary for us and then lead this discussion over Toni Morrison's story. So I think that Megan emailed a copy of the story to everyone in advance. So hopefully you have that PDF attached to the email and had a chance maybe to spend some time with it. And I'm just going to turn it over to you, Chris, to lead the session.
Fantastic. Thanks so very much, guys. Thank you for joining us. You could be having your, late lunch, but you started to, forget it, and then you're stuck with me. By the time this is done, I might relocate to Joplin and, do a sabbatical over there. Then you guys can get rid of me. Yeah. Oh, she's like, yeah, do it. But again, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of, the breakout session. I have a sort of a 2-slide thing that I want to pull up. Let's see. Okay, you see it? Okay, this is just a 2. Yeah, okay, I think I got it. And well, recitative turns out to be Toni Morrison's only major published short story. Toni Morrison wrote, novels. She wrote, essays, and she also wrote poetry. Even though she doesn't call herself much of a poet, we know Toni Morrison is a gifted poet. Her language is mesmerizing. Her imagination is off this world. And, she wrote a small collection of poetry called 5 Poems. It's only 5 poems. In fact, if you put them on Google, they will show up. But she never talked about it. She never discussed it in interviews because she's like, I'm not a poet, guys, But she is one heck of a short story writer, though. And, this short story, Recidive, published in 1983, I've taught it because I teach Morrison in somewhat regular rotation. I also teach African-American literature in a regular rotation. And when I teach my survey of African-American literature, 1900, sort of 20th century, 1900 to present, this short story is a part of it. And it's also anthologized in a few African-American literature anthologies, one of them being Call and Response. You'll also find it elsewhere. But Recidive, is a story that each time I teach it, and if you've read it now, whether you finished reading it or you're halfway through reading it, and you see what Toni Morrison does, and she drives you crazy because you're trying to figure out which of these girls is white and which of these girls is black. And all the clues are right there, but you don't know. And at some point, Toni Morrison was asked, do you really know which of them is black and white? She's like, yeah, I know. Like, how come you don't tell us? She's like, I ain't going to tell you. It's one of those, if I tell you, I kill you, type moments. So she's like, yeah, I'm having fun with my readers. I'm messing with their heads. She knows which one is black and which one is white. But the point for Toni Morrison is once you start guessing on race, you start pulling on your prejudices. We all have them. We all have them. We've been socialized to have them, to play on stereotypes. And there is no denying, all you have to do is deny somebody the knowledge of a racial identity, and then you start speculating. You start conjecturing, and then you start to put all of those markers on people. But also, let me tell you something else, and then I'll get back to the slides. Each time I teach this short story, I teach it from 2 perspectives. One is what the story tells me, and the other is what the story doesn't tell me, which is at the end of this short story, it dawns on you that Toni Morrison is playing on the idea of memory. What do we remember? how come we may be 10 people that witnessed a past event, but we never remember it the same way? We may have been at the scene, where something that is memorable happened. But then if you ask me what happened, I'm going to paint a completely different picture, because it depends on what I saw, what I decide to privilege. But also I read it as a commentary on feminism and white women's sisterhood, especially going back to the women's liberation movement. What is the second wave feminism or third wave? Post 60s, second wave of feminism. And what happened with the civil rights movement at a time of busing, when children were being bussed, and then the acrimony, the conflict as to who gets bussed and who doesn't, and the part that parents played in determining sort of issues of choice. I don't want to bust my child. Yes, I do want to bust my child. And then these are white and Black women whose memories of this historical moment are divergent. But what is absolutely striking, and this is my last word on the prefatory matter about it, is that Toni Morrison is telling us that our memories are codependent. Our memories are codependent. We have to put our memories together to form a complete picture, or the whole story, right? We have to join what we remember. Otherwise, our memories are fragments. We only remember bits and pieces until we join our stories with other people's stories. Then we get a more complex, sensibility of the past. So you may think, well, I remember everything, but that's not true, because your memory can be contradicted. Your memory could be faulty. Maybe you didn't remember what you thought you remembered. So, the way, our stories somehow are mutually dependent, the way our pasts are also very much complementary. Toni Morrison brings all of that in recitative, right? So that's sort of a prefatory, backdrop to it. And what I have on the, I thought the story was, will also be very pertinent, to the conference, right? Issues of multi-perspectival, narration, and, the decolonial nature of telling stories and the power of language, right? So this is what I have that could drive our breakout session: the meaning of the title award recitative, the basic plot line, the sort of the narrator, Twyla, point of view is first person, but also is contradicted. So even though this first person narrator thinks, I remember what happened, I was there, I'm pretty sure what I'm telling you, the other person who is also witness is like, nope, that's not what I remember. That's not what I'm sorry, that's not what happened. You see, and then the characterization, symbolisms, race, gender, disability, and stereotype. Toni Morrison is genius. I tell people I'm the African president of the Toni Morrison groupie, and I'm like, can I join? I'm like, yes, it's free. Just go buy a book. No membership fees. It's not like a conference where you have to pay $150 and then hotel room and then Dr. Mauser, you know what I'm talking about, right? There you go. This one is free membership. We serve fries and burger with it. Just join us. Then Women's Liberation Movement, and then on this page, how the past is remembered and generational change. Okay, that's sort of it. The word, I'll say what the word is to me, and then I'll open it up. The word recitative comes from music. It's used to describe like musical composition, sort of where the chord progression relies on vagueness, like different, songs that are combined, going sort of fragmentary, but ultimately, coming together. So it's like recitation. It's like a recitation. It's interesting. Toni Morrison, we use that word to talk about, it's a befitting word, I think, talking about the different fragments of music or the different fragments of memory. Any initial reactions? Like, has anybody read this before? By the way, anybody?
I have,
Okay,
but I'm also a member of that fan club. So
there you go. See, you've been a member. I think you are the secretary when we formed it, right?
yes.
You know,
and I taught it recently in a literature class, and it was an introduction to literature class. So that's been just a couple of years ago. But
how did your students react to it?
it was an online class, and so not as many reactions as you get in a discussion because it was asynchronous as well. But quite a few of the discussions, they were really interested in thinking about the memory part, which I was really glad about, that they didn't only, well, they were very frustrated, as you said, with Morrison's lack of revealing which one is the white woman. And I told them that Paradise, she does the same thing, right? She opens that novel with that very powerful first line of they shoot the white woman first.
That's right.
And then you don't know through the whole novel.
Right.
Because again, she's playing with those stereotypes and our ideas about those implicit biases that we have. So they did talk a bit about that, but they were very interested in thinking about people remembering the same events differently.
Yes, absolutely. And anybody else, any initial reactions? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I had an initial reaction, which is that even though it was written the year I was born, I thought that a lot of the way that wealth and kind of achieving middle class status and living within an urban kind of, eventually both of these women achieve a certain degree of comfort and almost cosmopolitan social capital.
Yes.
And it struck me as like those kinds of themes are talked about almost exactly the same way these days.
Yes.
It's a story, it's almost shocking it was written, 38 years ago, because it seems like a story that could be told now. You just add maybe a cell phone into the mix and it sounds like something from 2022.
You couldn't be more right, Will. And you know what is so interesting though? Sometimes it's like there's what is that thing? It's a thin line between love and hate. Mm-hmm. But it's a thin line between middle class and working class. Some people are just one paycheck off. Mm-hmm. Just one incident, one paycheck off, God forbid, some kind of adversity, and they drop. So, for Toni Morrison, these two women may have achieved the upward mobility, but their middle class status is still kind of dicey. Mm-hmm. It's still kind of dicey. And, the issue you described in 1983, when the story was published, still pertains today. Still pertains today. So the middle class is very tenuous. Unless you're, at the very top, you're just holding on, especially as things are. So yeah, absolutely. Well, and anyone else, please? Initial reactions?
I really enjoyed how you used memory, the idea of memory, because I was like, oh yeah, memory can also serve as a form of erasure of people. And oftentimes with, if we don't do anything about it, if there are no stories being told, then those who have power to erase parts of history will co-op and, we'll co-opt the history of those things. And I was thinking about how powerful that is, the idea of memory as that.
And Cynthia, right? Yes. And Toni Morrison's works, practically all of them, from what I know, all her works deal with memory in one way or the other. The different configurations of memory, but is this idea, as you were saying, where the cooptation of memory, it becomes almost serviceable to somebody else's end. what you think you remember becomes an instrument used to erase or to reinforce, right? And one of the most striking things to me about the story is Twyla is the one telling us the story. Okay, she's like, this is how we got to the orphanage. Roberta and I, we got here when we were young. It's like we were dumped by our parents. So unfortunately or fortunately, I end up boarding with this Black girl or white girl. But you notice something, initially, Toni Morrison's genius is just off the chain. And when you do like micro reading, close reading, and I almost tell my students, notice how they switch their beds. When they're in that room, there is the fluidity of location. As children, right, certain things come easy, and then memory hardens as you get older. There are certain things you can care less, so long as you have your, your body in the room, and you have the racial differences though. But those lines are not too hard that they cannot be crossed. But as they get older, the perceptions harden because now they are outside in the world. You notice they go from the orphanage to outside in the world. And then what they remember about the past, to which they bore witness, what they remember is now very contingent. And there are other people who are interested, in that past as well. Anyway, anybody else, please? Any other initial reactions or just, anything that stood out to you? It's a lot one can say about the short story. Any other thoughts? Anybody?
I've already spoken, but I love a short story that has the scope of a novel in it. I mean, you read this story and you kind of feel like you've read a novel that spanned over like a generation. And I think that's a really good sign. I don't know if this is apocryphal, but apparently the Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges said he had never read a novel that wouldn't have been better just as a short story. And I think this is a good example of how a really well done short story contains all of the richness of a novel.
I couldn't agree with you more. Notice that this is just one short story by Toni Morrison, but then, it's been anthologized in a lot of ways, just like James Baldwin's, Sonny's Blues, that, a lot of us, have also, taught or read. And if we were to go back to Twyla's narration of the story, how from St. Bonnie's and the encounter life changes, she starts working, waitress job. But I'm fascinated by how their paths keep crossing. This is what is so striking about this short story. They leave the orphanage, girls who were abandoned by their mothers. One is too religious, carries a Bible, and the other one, a dancer, and one is sick, and they don't quite respect each other. They don't like each other. These are girls who are victims of bad parenting, bad motherhood. This is really the trope of the bad mother that Toni Morrison is exploring. But when they leave the orphanage, you would assume that their paths will never cross again. Like high school, everybody go their way, but I think their paths cross again three times afterwards. At different circumstances in their lives. And the question I usually ask my students is, how come they keep meeting again? How come they keep running into each other? So that's sort of a question I'm throwing to our chat room, a breakout session. Like, what do you think? How come they can't get away from each other? Right? I don't know if anybody has any. I have my thoughts. I don't know what anybody else thinks. Is it an accident? Is it providential? Is it I don't know. Any speculation? That I'll tell you what I think.
Well, I do like that idea about the memory too. It's almost as if like once you share memories with someone, there's like an inescapable bond, even though it's not the same memory for each of you. And so I was thinking, since I do oral tradition, I was thinking too about that idea of how every time an oral poet composes their poem, it's different, but they will say that it's the same. And that they're using the same words, but of course they don't mean lexicon, they mean like the thematic construction. And it always is altered based on the audience who's present and also the time period. Right. And so I feel like each of these changes, each of these meetings is like a recurrence of their relationship together and the memories that they just can't get to match up because their traditions are separate, even if they share that base.
I completely agree with you. Let me throw in this ring. Do you think if we take St. Bonnie's as a metaphor for, say, America, where white and Black women found themselves, whether by accident of history or intentionally, right? The orphanage becomes, if you will, a space that they initially inhabit as children. And as time passes, their memories diverge, their circumstances diverge, the experiences diverge, but somehow they are still drawn back to that initial moment of encounter, right? Because it is the most consequential part of their meeting. Yeah. You know, does that make sense what I'm saying? So
it does.
Even as they move out, you know, or like the poets of old, they compose old, old poems that are, still the same thing, but they say it's new. But we know that something is pulling them together, which means this history they're trying to reconstruct cannot be fully told until their memories are merged. So, to me, the symbolism of that past is the character Maggie. They call her, what is it, Bozo, right? She is, she's bow-legged. She has disability. And Maggie is a woman who is also ruffled by other women. And Twyla and Roberta are witnesses to what happened to Maggie. But when they meet again to figure out what happened to Maggie, they can't agree as to what happened to Maggie. But they were there.
Right.
Does that make sense? They were witnesses to what happened to another woman. Obviously, they did not interfere. But then, is it calling into question the idea of sisterhood or the idea of female solidarity? That other women were also complicit, if you will, in the victimization of another woman. And this story, it reflects the women's liberation politics, right? So that's sort of what I was thinking, how they keep coming together because they can't escape each other. Their history needs them to join their stories and then to try to figure out why they are complicit in the very patriarchy that they are trying to dismantle. Maggie becomes a symbol of it. Right. So, well, let me put the big elephant in the room. So who is Black and who's white? Come on now, somebody got to tell me something. Who do you think is Black and who do you think is white? Come on, Will.
I'm not going to guess, but I am going to say that I think that I made up my mind early in the story, and then subsequent things, my confirmation bias kicked in. So I've been furiously going back over the story here, looking for whatever it was that convinced me one way or another, and now I can't find it, of course, because it was just confirmation bias at the time.
So you, Will, are you telling me you're trying to chicken out? Come on, brother.
I
had decided, I'm not going to say this is right, but I had decided that Twyla was the Black girl.
Okay, I want to hear your reasons. You think because she likes fried chicken KFC?
No. I think it's the scene in the diner when she's working in the diner and Roberta is going on the road to see Jimi Hendrix. And of course, Jimi Hendrix is a Black artist, but for some reason I pictured his white fandom because I don't know, it's probably because, you know, something about the cultural history of the 60s where your stereotypical rock and roll fan of that era was a white person, not a Black person. So that's probably why that got into my head.
I'll give you a pass. There. And so sometimes I think that too. And I'm like, the names, is Toni Morrison trying to suggest something with the names, Roberta and Twyla? And my students say, have you ever seen a Black woman who was called Twyla before? But they are there. They are there. So Cynthia, I'm not going to give you a pass. Well, what do you think? Who's white? Who's Black?
I have not. I've read this, but it's been a while, so I'm just here listening.
See, very smart.
So,
very.
I would have to look through it again, which I have it pulled up here. So
very smart. Let me see who else. Can I call people's names?
I think you have been.
Hi, Denise. Hi, Denise. Hey, Denise, how's it going?
Hey, Chris, I'm sorry. I'm listening and working at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I got to, but it's been wonderful. Thank you. That's all.
All right. Okay. I see Natiana. What do you think? Who's Black? Who's white?
There we go. It's so hard for me to choose because I know whichever one I choose, I'm exposing my race, like my biases. And so I'm trying to be so in the middle that I can't choose for sure.
You're trying to chicken out too. That's okay.
I am. I'm absolutely chickening out. I'm not gonna pretend I'm not.
That's okay.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I try to think of what I wanted to use as my deciding factors. And like I always go back to the mothers, and I'm not sure I can tell from that either, right? But there are some definite like biases there about the mothers and why each child is at St. Bonnie's. So I haven't decided, but that's what I wanted to use as my deciding factor, right? As the mothers.
The mothers. No, not the other cultural history things that Will was talking about. Jimi Hendrix, food, hair.
He was looking at those other details, which I also want to use, but I definitely, like the first time through it, I was thinking about their circumstances and what that could tell us, and what Morrison is saying about what that automatically speaks to each of us.
Yes, and the whole point being that some of these codes are switchable. They are really interchangeable. The characteristics, we believe pertain to one group. When you switch them, you realize they also crossover. All of those codes that are built into the story. And Toni Morrison is pretty much, forcing us to confront what happens with texts that are very ambivalent. I think Recidivism is a very postmodern short story. It goes, to this very idea of the incomplete text. What happens when a text is incomplete? How do we read something that doesn't provide us the conventional handholds of fiction? Once you start telling a story, before you know it, somebody's called white, black, green, yellow, and you know where they belong. So what happens to things that are more indeterminate, right? How do we read texts that are very baffling? Text, that push us to make certain choices that betray, some of the, stereotypes and, judgments, we have about people. And she does this in other short stories, in other novels too. In her, novel, Love, Bill Cosey, writes his will on a menu, on a restaurant menu, and it's a fragment of paper, but the will is incomplete. And all the women in this man's life are trying to kill themselves because everybody believes they know what the end result is.
Mhm.
And as she was saying, who is the white girl that gets shot first in paradise?
Yep.
Right? Are you even sure it's a white girl that gets shot in paradise, or is the narrator messing with her head? So for Toni Morrison is, it's just how we sometimes have to pause and not be too quick to judge, to make conclusions, very definitive statements about knowledge, because what is very definitive to somebody could be indefinite to somebody else. It depends on positioning, it depends sometimes on gender, right? But I like what she does also with this disability. Not to get into disability studies, but this woman, Maggie, who is bow-legged, who is not has challenges, right? She's confronting, and she's in the middle of a woman's collective, but they don't quite treat her with the kind of empathy, the kind of understanding, the kind of if you will, sympathy as well that she deserves. But also she's a woman. How do we deal with that? If I flip to this next one, language and race. I know we've been sort of talking about it. How does language shape our constructions of racial identity? Toni Morrison was asked, even as much as we took out some of these codes that would betray racial identification, but also there is a certain purity in the narrative language where it is not denigrated. And I use that word in reference to blacken. There is the assumption that sometimes when you read a Black novel, you can tell that this is written by a black author. It's been said, it's in the criticism that there is a certain tonality that you can put your finger on. You say you read a Richard Wright, certain things jump at you. This is a Black author. You don't even have to know the identity of and Toni Morrison takes away, some of those things in the English language, that have been used to ghettoize, that have been used to make certain assumptions. And then this story could have been written by a white author, as somebody pointed out. But then the question is, what is the difference between a story written by a white author and a non-white author? And Toni Morrison, lays it out there. So I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts, from reading it. What stood out to you? What question you may have? Anyone, please, or how it may pertain to the conference. Let me see. I see Garrick. Hey, Garrick.
Hi, I haven't read your book actually. I'm just listening right now.
Okay, that's quite all right. Hi, Jody.
Yeah, I feel like the worst student ever. Like when you walk in the classroom and you realize that no one has read it. I got the email with the attachment this morning, and so I am devastated to say that as much as I love Toni Morrison, I'm also in the group that just didn't make it through the reading. But I will say, on your slides, one of the things that interests me, based on, kind of my own area of study, is if you have, again, I haven't read the story, yes. But if you have thoughts about the feminist lens or approach to it, because I know that for world literature in particular, it's a very tentative discussion about sisterhoods because of kind of this disparity between experience and location, etc. So I'm super interested to hear your thoughts about the story in that regard, if you would be willing to share them.
I would be more than willing to share it. And thanks so much for actually going there, because it is something that I think is encrypted in the story. Sort of, if you read beyond the text, right, or even if you read within the text, it is pretty clear that these two women are Black and white women. there's no ambiguity. It's just that we can't quite tell which one is white and which one is black. But also the experiences are historically grounded. There are references to things that are very specific in time, right? Things like the busing, things like Jimi Hendrix. These are historical codes that point us to specific points in history. But also you have to remember now that when it comes to feminism, the history of feminism, is one that is somehow contested. How Black women saw the entrance. I'm not talking about going back to antebellum times, and you have Black women scholars who will say Black women were feminists before the world was all the rage, that they were doing things that were very feminist without using that word to describe themselves. But I'm talking about those historical markers, that we used to, periodize the feminist movement. And if you remember during the 60s, right, how Black women were torn as to whether they should join the movement. They were caught between race, gender, and class, right? There were those who told Black women, if you joined, you were trying to oppress Black men. Why should you join them, right? Your emphasis should be race first, not gender. And you have people who are saying, well, it has to be gender, class, and race. And then you had a faction that said, well, we are not feminists, we are womanists. Alice Walker coined the term womanist. And then you had, all these works by Barbara Christian and, some of the anthologies that will come forth as Black women trying to sort out, if you will, their place in the feminist movement. So for Black women, it's a very contested site, and their relationship to the white women-led feminist movement, was a struggle for a lot of them. So what this story tells me is almost a fictional representation of that tension, that sense of conflict as to what white and Black women remember, what really is the subject of their sisterhood. Does that make sense? Roberta and Twyla, have to figure out how they are girls. What is really there? What is the point of connection? And to me, their point of connection is history. There are things that bind them from the historical perspective of them being women. These were girls, they were abandoned, right? Without race, they were abandoned somewhere. So that links them. But then, because they cannot get their stories straight, as they became or become parts of, historical circumstances. So there is a way in which the story is almost symbolic. It's a parable, if you will, of the, Black women, white women, feminist coalition, solidarity, as well as chasm. So that's how, that's my thought on that. I don't know if you answered your question, but that's the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah. Do you feel like that backdrop, I mean, it's a terrible question maybe, but that backdrop gives any clues to the characters in terms of whatever racial designation Morrison is working with? I mean, I'm thinking, kind of with the Africana womanism, but also the notion of being doubly colonized, right? And having those types of tensions maybe suggesting, or perhaps not, a particular evidence for reading them as belonging to one of those racial groups.
And the African womanism, I don't know if anybody had anything to add to it. That my colleague here, Cleonora House of Wims, developed and has written about, talked about, borrowing from the African conceptions, of culture and gender and female-male relationship, and why you have to, privilege also men's participation. That men can also be womanist and feminist at the same time, right? The strict dichotomies we draw, when we take men out, this is just for us, this is our stuff, and that men cannot contribute. And she's like, no, they have a place. They need to have a place, in the feminist consciousness. But, to your other point, I do think that Toni Morrison, wrote an essay on the women's lib, what has the Black woman got to do with women's lib? You know, it's an essay. And if you read it, it's like you're reading this short story. You know, there are correlations.
Okay, well, now I have to go find that because I have
Yes.
not, for as much of her stuff that I've
Yes,
read in
it
part.
is there.
Now I got to
She-
find that one.
Yes, actually, she wrote an essay on women's lib. And then she basically gets into, you know, some of the schisms, you know, the tensions that Black women feel, you know, about the movement. I mean, we know about the intra-racial tensions with, you know, folks like Audre Lorde during the 1960s, you know, how even within the feminist movement, there was also issues of sexuality and sexual orientation. You know, who belongs and who doesn't belong, you know, whose memory counts and whose memory should not be privileged. You know, I don't know if anybody has, if I start talking about Toni Morrison, I get carried away. But I don't know if anybody has any thoughts, please.
So I'll say Christine put something in the chat. She's not well enough to be on camera, but she was wondering about Morrison often speaking of race as an invention of society, once writing that, quote, the realm of racial difference has been allowed an intellectual weight to which it has no claim, and end quote. And she was wondering if you might speak to that and think about that quote in relation to both your thoughts about Morrison and the story.
Well, that's a heavy question, you know, heavy in the sense that it finds Toni Morrison at a paradox. Because on the one hand, she's pretty definite. She's like, I'm a Black woman author. You know, I identify as Black and I make no apologies about it. You know, unlike other authors, Black authors, especially even authors of color, who, because of the pressures to bring it to mainstream neutrality, racial neutrality, or identity neutrality, will say, well, I'm just a writer first. You know, and you know, my race or my gender, whatever identification is second. Morrison is like, I am a Black woman writer, right? So when she makes an assertion about the inventedness of race, but that is true. I don't think, you know, that is a scientific truth, you know, that race as we know it, you know, is pretty much constructed, you know, to somebody's end, and is being weaponized, even as much as we try to say, well, you know, guys, biologically we're all the same, but race has been at the service of a whole lot in history. So yes, you know, she may say that race is invented, is constructed, but all you have to do, as I tell guys, is stand someplace in New York City and try catch a cab at night if you're a Black man, and you know, race will hit you in the face. You see, so it finds Toni Morrison as some of her double speak. Sometimes she intentionally pawns on language, and she did this to throw people off, because sometimes, you know, she will get questions that are designed to pin her down, you know, and she shows how elusive, intellectually nimble, you know, she is. So, you know, the very question, you know, has to do with, you know, how recitative reinforces the notion of there being racial you know, identities, you know, things that have become parts of who we are, and we identify with those things. When you hear the commentary about hair, you probably thought, well, you know, there's a commentary about her hair smells. You know, I didn't even go there. Yes, you know, her hair smells, right? And each time I bring that to students, they're like, and it's a very touchy topic, because we have all kinds of assumptions about, you know, whose hair is nice, whose hair is not nice. You know, Chris Rock did a whole thing on, you know, good hair, right? And, you know, stuff about religiosity. You know, somebody carrying their cross, you know, all over the place, somebody being very condescending, you know, somebody talking about they have it all good to themselves. And these are things taken from racial realities. I don't think they are invented. These are things that are, to me, if we tell each other the truth, these are things we have heard. These are things we have heard, you know, we may have made those assumptions in ourselves. So Toni Morrison, you know, tries to deflate when she thinks the question is one that is supposed to make her think narrowly, you know, very reductively about things that are more complex. than the questions, would suffer. So that's how I will answer, that question. Anyway.
Excellent, thank you. And we're almost out of time. So I don't know if there's a final question or a closing thought from you, Chris?
Well, my closing thought would be to thank you guys again. I know this is a conference, and the turnout was not bad. The turnout right here is also not bad, and for making me a part of this experience. Quite honestly, I was telling somebody that the past 2 years I've been teaching online, and I just got back to the classroom, this semester, and it just dawned on me the magic that happens in the classroom. Why we miss this stuff so much. Online virtual teaching is not the same. Never will be the same. And just to get back to, the classroom, to know why I enjoy this thing so much, why I will do it for free. So it's absolutely good to be able to share this moment with you all. And for you hanging out with me during the afternoon, I will remember it. My kids just got back from school. The first thing they asked me, Daddy, how was the lecture? How did they go? Because they saw me working on, the plenary, and they also, the young members of the Toni Morrison Society, they've seen enough of Toni Morrison here. So thank you guys, so very much. You never know. You may see me in person. We do this, live. So thanks again.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. It's been a great
so
afternoon.
Much.
It's been a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks so very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. You guys have a lovely evening.
And I just have a few final closing thoughts before everyone leaves. I just want to thank everyone for attending today's event, especially all of our speakers. I believe this event does important work towards, creating a more open and inclusive university. And we couldn't do it without all of you. And I hope that it will keep expanding in the future. The last 2 years have been kind of rough with the COVID, but we're hoping to move back on campus and have more interactive sessions like usual. A special thank you also to my co-chairs, Dr. Megan Bever and Dr. Jansi Sundararajan, for their help planning and coordinating this event, especially the last couple of weeks, because I'm technically on sabbatical, and so my communication has not been great. And to Kyle and Amanda for the IT support. We moved online really quickly, and we couldn't have done it without them. And so we just really want to know that we want you to know how much we appreciate your hard work and your help. And finally, I just have one last reminder about the conference, in that one of the foundational things we wanted to do was to create a scholarship for BIPOC students, especially majoring in English or minoring in English. And we were able to do that the first year because of generous donors, and we established the Clark and Marina Pepper Scholarship that's offered once a year to a student in the English department. And so if you have any interest in donating to this fund and helping to keep both this conference going as well as the scholarship, there was a QR code on the promotional materials. So please feel free to consider donating so that we can continue to make this a very low or free registration event. And thank you guys so much. I have enjoyed all of the sessions and appreciate all of the hard work that went into this. Thank you.
Thank you. Adios.
Bye. Enjoy your afternoon, everyone.